we're nominally at the University of Sussex Business School, and in this little platform, which is the Future at Work Research Hub. So we're fortunate enough in the Zoom world to be able to hold our seminars bi-weekly. And it's been a great opportunity to see so many of you from outside the university, outside the school and the university, and outside the country. And I'm always very happy to have our guests, but today is even more special because Simel is someone I've known for, we're going to give away some stuff now, Simel, but 35 years. But she was a trailblazing sort of PhD researcher, and that has gone on to have a brilliant career looking at the sorts of things that are becoming more and more interesting to more of us who are interested in the future of work. Of course, there's a lot of talk about technology and how new technologies are going to change what we've assumed to be the standard type of work. But within that, there's also some of us interested in alternative ways of working and alternative futures. And this has been a running theme in our seminar series so far. So Simel comes to us from the International Labour Organization, and after decades of looking at cooperatives, she's the program manager at the enterprise department there, and I've asked her to say a few more words about how she came to be there and what she does do there. But there are discussion points for those of us who are academics doing the sort of the more sort of dry academic work. There are those of us who are more practice oriented, and hopefully there are some discussion points to emerge from today's talk at the point where we intersect. So Simel will talk for about half an hour, 40 minutes. We will then take some questions. You can sort of raise your hand at the point we reach the question time, or just put something in the chat, and I'll try to make sure that I give you the word. So hopefully we can make this as interactive as the platform allows us to. Welcome again, and I'm really delighted to have Simel tell us about what she does.
Thanks a lot, Edul. It's really a pleasure to be here with you, and I'm very excited to see also familiar faces from different walks of life. So yes, I've been the program manager at the Cooperatives unit of the International Labour Organization for the last 8-9 years. Before that, I was gender advisor for airspace region of the ILO for another 8 years. And then before that, I had a life in Washington, working in an international research organization, a lot of policy action research, operational research there. And economic organizing has always been something in the back of my mind from growing up, in Izmir, Ödül, where we would take trips to the Bademler village. You may remember, it's a village filled with wonders. It's like the Alice in Wonderland of cooperatives, a multi-purpose cooperative that has a theater, a library, a youth club. And I remember thinking, wouldn't it be great if all villages were like that? Cooperatives and solidarity organizing has always been a running theme, although my work has been more in development and economics, gender economics, as a feminist economist, and I salute other fellow feminist economists in the group, like Elizabeth Villagomez, who's worked a great many years on gender responsive budgeting. So yeah, that's me. And for me, I guess during our time here, I would like to share some thoughts on the forces transforming the world of work and the responses from the cooperative and wider social and solidarity economy. Some of you might be wondering, what has the ILO, the International Labour Organization, has to do with cooperatives? ILO is a specialized agency of the United Nations working with a mandate on social justice and decent work. But it has had a cooperatives unit since 1920, and consultation with cooperatives is outlined in its constitution. And I think that was partly because although the ILO was imagined as a tripartite organization of workers, employers, and governments in the post-industrial world, as a response to the industrial revolution, the last big transition, and yet, some workers were not being represented there. Some enterprises were not represented there, especially, for instance, those in rural areas, and what we would also today term as, in the informal economy. And and since the beginnings, I think the ILO, there were forces that wanted ILO to be quadripartite, to put cooperatives as one of the legs. It didn't happen, but International Cooperative Alliance has a general consultative status at the ILO. And there is, as ILO is a normative organization, there's an international standard, a recommendation on the promotion of cooperatives that is also very much a guide for our work in the organization. And to date, it's the only specialized agency of the UN with an explicit mandate on all cooperatives. For instance, Food and Agriculture Organization would look at agricultural cooperatives, or you may see for UNIDO more industrial. But in the context of the ILO, it's across all sectors. And nowadays, we are also working more and more on the wider social and solidarity economy. So cooperatives plus plus, whether these are, associations, foundations, and mutual organizations. And there is also discussions around the UN resolution that may also be in the making for social and solidarity economy. So for this last 100 plus years, ILO has been supporting cooperatives through research, policy advice, capacity building, always in partnership. And in addition to being normative, of course, it has this credibility, ability to bring the labor institutions together in social dialogue. Coming more to our days, the Labor Conference, International Labor Conference of 2019 adopted a Centenary Declaration on the future of work. And this declaration had a human-centered, human lens, focusing on enabling people to benefit from the changes that are taking place in the world of work. It called for strengthening institutions of work and reinvigorating the social contract. It also talked about the need for innovative solutions. You mentioned technology. When we say innovation, we are always thinking technological innovation, but I think in the context of our topic on so cooperatives, diversity of enterprises, including those in the, social enterprises and organizations, we are talking more, I think, of social innovation. And this declaration called for creating an enabling environment for entrepreneurship and sustainable enterprises, including cooperatives and social and solidarity economy. It reflected on economic, demographic, environmental, and technological megatrends that are transforming the world of work and how they are creating opportunities in some cases, but also resulting in loss of jobs and deterioration in quality of jobs in others. This declaration came before the pandemic hit, and so on that front, the transformative effects are still unfolding. Historically, we see the values of mutualism, self-help, solidarity witness a surge in popularity during crises, including financial crises, natural disasters, and conflicts. And such popularity can manifest in three different forms if we are to look at cooperatives. First, in increasing interest in existing cooperatives and social solidarity economy institutions, so people becoming members of financial co-ops, consumer co-ops, food co-ops. We've seen this, for instance, during the last financial crisis. Also, we see in the creation and expansion of such institutions, for instance, new platform workers setting up their cooperatives, or bankrupt companies transitioning into worker-owned cooperatives. And then we also see repurposing of existing institutions with new missions. And around COVID, we've seen this. For instance, agricultural cooperatives or financial cooperatives expanding their services to address health needs of their populations, especially in underserved areas. So I would like to share some of these examples with you, starting with the environment, touch upon technology, demographics, and then conclude with what's emerging on that co-op solidarity economy front with respect to COVID context. With the environment, starting with the environment, climate change concerns affecting our world in so many ways, connected to the pandemic. Also, green jobs, green enterprises we are talking are also on the rise. And cooperatives can have been and can be further instrumental in ensuring a just transition of climate change adaptation as well as mitigation. For instance, mutual insurance for crops, diversification of crops, energy saving irrigation, construction and construction techniques are adaptation strategies that cooperatives, especially agricultural cooperatives, can use. More examples in mitigation could be forestry, renewable energy, recycling type cooperatives. Forestry cooperatives and solidarity associations are important in managing these commons, and they've been set up also in coordination, of course, with governments, local governments in Japan, Korea, US, Canada, Indonesia too. Both, it's a balance on the two fronts, the two goals. One is to secure livelihoods of the forest communities, but also ensuring sustainable forestry practices. In renewable energy, cooperatives are gaining ground, and also other community-based associations are gaining ground in Europe, in North America, harnessing wind power, solar power, biogases. And these have a number of competitive advantages, including democratic control, local control over energy production and use, the capacity to create local employment, and also reasonable pricing. Of course, so far the examples are more from the global north, and a conducive legal environment, adequate financing mechanisms are important to make these work. Also, I think having a cooperative ecosystem of legal, business advisory services, business incubators, institutions that can fulfill research and development functions is important. In Europe, there is a federation of citizen energy co-ops with more than like 1,500 energy cooperatives with a membership of more than 1 million citizens active in energy transition, and provides a range of services for businesses, local authorities that want to work on community-driven alternative energy. They do policy advocacy, community coaching, financing, training. So what's important is you may have these, hundreds or thousands of cooperatives around, but to be able to have, they do create a certain economy of scale. Yes, from one person to 50 people or 500 people, but that's not often enough for policy advocacy. You need this million type numbers if you want to influence, let's say, Brussels. And I think, one of the important things here also is, in addition to vertical integration, having these, secondary, tertiary institutions, is this coming together of the legal environment, adequate financing, the ecosystem, supportive, non-financial support institutions. And for instance, in Ödül and my country, Turkey, there is some regulation around energy cooperatives, and there has been attempts at setting up renewable energy, but this whole initial capital needed to get these off the ground has still been a challenge. So I think the import this here the partnerships are important. Partnering with local governments is important, and also the transition of know-how on cooperative governance and management from existing cooperative movements. Because I'm talking about like this new generation of cooperatives and solidarity organizations, but then there is those well-established ones, and you need a cooperation and a connection and between those the transfer of power between the generations of these institutions. Um, Going more to the global south, we see in urban areas cooperatives being set up in waste management, so informal workers, recycling workers, waste pickers in countries like India, Brazil, Colombia, South Africa, set up cooperatives to be able to integrate their members into waste management chains and to be able to negotiate with local governments for things like occupational safety and health, more ergonomic storage facilities, more training, more ergonomic, equipment, etc., because they fulfill in many of these places complementary services to the local government. We also see trade unions involved in a number of these cases. For instance, in Pune, Karnataka, a trade union has been instrumental in setting up waste picker co-op that works in conjunction with the municipality. So again, alliances are very important between different types of institutions. In Turkey, the Turkish Trade Union Federation has also worked with Waste Picker Association and local municipalities in Ankara to integrate them into waste management chains, for instance, by running their own sorting centers. So there are a number of global efforts also to see how these informal waste pickers and their cooperative organizations could benefit from online applications to facilitate their work, like a map that shows them the closing sorting center. So from that, I could maybe transition to technology a little bit, talk about how we see cooperatives engaging on that front with new technologies, changing the way work is organized, redefining relationships between workers and employers in the platform economy, gig economy, and due to still the limited and non-existing national and international regulatory frameworks, there are significant risks of decent work deficits and non-compliance issues, and for the positive potential of technology to be realized and the threats of increased unemployment and domination of like capital over labor to be countered, new models of collective ownership, democratic governances are being both imagined but also being put to use. And so we see cooperatives being used to help strengthen voice and representation of workers in the platform economy. There is a term coined by a researcher, activist, academic in New School in New York that has been also kind of mobilizing a network around this term and of platform cooperatives. And taxi drivers, for instance, are among workers that set up worker cooperatives and use online applications, their own online applications, to counter the intermediation of ride-hailing companies that withhold the rights and benefits from drivers. In the US, cooperatives such as Green Taxi Cooperative in Denver and People's Ride in Michigan offer such alternatives through driver-owned platforms. And these are often open access, Creative Commons platforms. So this is technology in the hands of for use to the benefit of people and workers. Still, these are very small, and again, you need policymakers and regulation to be able to allow for these initiatives to flourish, especially from local government, cities. And in the UK, there are tech co-ops, tech worker co-ops, like you may have heard of Outlandish, that builds data tools, websites, and campaigns for positive social impact. And then they have a network of ethical cooperatives providing technology. This network, CoTech, provides also digital and creative services, and started with the UK, but now has member co-ops, tech co-ops, among young tech workers from around the world. And users of these services work directly with the people who own the business, who have a stake in making sure the projects succeed, and there are no private shareholders throwing out dividends, so they get the value for money and the benefit of working with small and responsive businesses, which draw on pooling of skills and know-how from a large network of resources. Another one that I will mention is Smart. It's a cooperative of freelancers that started in Belgium, but has more than now, I think, 35,000 members in 9 countries and 40 cities in Europe. And it provides a number of online services for its members: contract templates, invoicing, budget management, legal advice. They have creative economy workers among their members, but also delivery workers. I was telling Ödül before we were getting started that the 2021 edition of the International Labour Organization's World Economic and Social Outlook report is on the role of digital labor platforms in transforming the world of work. That should be coming out in the next week or so. So you might want to have a look at that if you're interested in this realm. And we will also have a complementary report out on that we've done in collaboration with IT for Change, a research NGO in Kerala, India, on organizing among workers in the digital economy in the global south. So that should be coming within the next few months. Coming to the demographics realm, demographic changes are also playing a key role in shaping the world of work. And I will mention emerging co-op engagement in care provision, women empowerment, and forced displacement here. The need for care is growing worldwide. It's driven by demographic shifts, including growing aging populations, rising number of persons living with chronic illness. And these shifts pose policy challenges for care provision, and in the absence of affordable, accessible public and private options, cooperatives are emerging as providers of care services. We've done a global mapping on cooperatives operating in the provision of care. And what we found was, and these are available from our website, I can share with you the link. These often have women as majority of founders, members, beneficiaries, and workers. And they provide daycare, home care, care for disabled, chronically ill, and elderly care. And there are some very interesting studies around COVID, how, for instance, in northern Italy, where there was devastating effects of the pandemic on elderly care centers, those which were cooperatively run, because they were multi-stakeholder in nature, meaning they had workers and members and local government, workers, beneficiary families, as well as local government as members. They were very quick to respond and isolate. So there are some very interesting, in fact, insights coming out of how, when you're closer to the local and more connected to the key stakeholders, how your services can be more effective and efficient. So We've also seen that these cooperatives have, I mean, provided improved wages and benefits and facilitate formalization and professionalization of the workers, especially when they are members of the cooperative. Although we've also seen in this, which often happens in the care economy realm and also where social service provision, a great deal of burnout. So self-care kind of gets lost in the process when you are attending to caring for others. And this is something I think that needs to be looked into in these organizations. And home care workers, migrant domestic workers are also setting up cooperatives in providing care in the US, Italy, like in Brooklyn. There's a big care cooperative, mainly for elderly, but also child care of more than 3,000 women members, women of color and migrant workers. And other countries also have care workers organized in cooperatives using their online applications to be able to negotiate better terms and conditions for their workers. And in some cases, they've even gone into franchising with support from community organizations and women's groups. And this, especially for cooperatives among disadvantaged workers, informal workers, this kind of accompaniment, mentorship for 3 years, 5 years is very important. We see this, for instance, with SEVA, Self-Employed Women's Association in India, which is a trade union of 1.8 million rural and informal economy workers, women, but at the same time, it uses cooperatives. Its first institution was a financial cooperative for its members, the Co-op Bank, Seva Co-op Bank, in the 1970s. And since then, it has maybe over 106 cooperatives, but they have a federation, Co-op Federation, that supports these organizations in to sustainability. It may take 2 years, 3 years, 5 years. Some graduate, some are always needing a little bit of that care, depending on, of course, the local context, social economic context. A concern that has been raised, and this has come actually from feminist economist researchers in the UK, whether these care cooperatives are actually trying to fill a retreat of government services. And I would say no, but of course there is that risk, especially with maybe local governments, cutting public services or cutting expenditures and then pushing out these services to co-ops. But then these are not real co-ops because these are displaced workers and they are dependent on providing services still through the local government. So especially trade unions are also very sensitive, and rightly so. I think it's important for us to keep track and document sustainable cases, which often build on cooperatives working closely with local governments. For instance, in Italy, where social cooperatives are very developed and there is a very good law around, they form consortia, a secondary company of the social cooperatives to then bid for public procurement of care services. So this is then done in very close coordination. And as I mentioned, the multi-stakeholder co-op of where local government and worker and beneficiary are also members is one way to keep checks and balances. So local government is both financier but regulator, but also a member stakeholder. In contexts where social and cultural norms may restrict women's engagement in the public sphere, emergence of women-led or women-only cooperatives is being observed, and cooperatives that are created by and for women help overcome some of these constraints, and which may otherwise limit their participation in the workforce and can be particularly relevant in gender segregated contexts. For instance, we see from data in Iran From satellite accounts, women's labor force participation is much lower than their participation in cooperatives. Um, we see in India, Turkey, Jordan, women-only co-ops active in some of the traditional, um, sectors where you will find women. So the gender division of labor being replicated also in terms of sectors, whether this is, education, food processing, crafts. I mentioned care services. Um, there is also some concern when these cooperatives are set up largely or even solely from external push, government, donor, NGO, political party, rather than from members' understanding of and conviction and working in cooperatives. So this is a risk that needs to be uh, kept in mind. Um, I've seen, for instance, women naturally being drawn to the cooperative solution, but not having know-how of how to manage a cooperative, how to govern it, what are the legal tax implications. And these initiatives are then likely to fail. So the support institution element, governmental or non-governmental, becomes again very essential there. In the context of global population flows, again, the future work is expected to witness a continued increase in migrants, refugees, and as most of this is also related to the world of work and the livelihoods realm, uh, cooperatives are emerging as playing a variety of roles in displacement context. They do provide, we've done another global mapping on this recently, and they provide, we found practical services such as access to goods, services, employment, income generation, finance, knowledge exchange. They also build certain social capacity, some peace building functions when it's, done in connection with local host communities. And of course, there's trust issues in getting these right, but when it works, it can really be a bridge making initiatives. We've in the global mapping, we saw several pathways. I'll briefly mention those. Host community cooperatives providing services to displaced persons. We've seen this in Canada, Italy, Spain, with social cooperatives working with local governments and donor organizations in doing the frontline services, whether it's food or clothing or shelter or language and job placement. Host community cooperatives recruiting displaced persons as workers. We see this a lot, for instance, in agricultural cooperatives, some in housing as well, Jordan, Lebanon. And then host community cooperatives, including displaced persons as members. Some countries don't allow this in their laws, others do. So we were just talking with Jordanian stakeholders this morning around this new strategy and how the importance of having inclusive strategy. Host communities also provide capacity building and training displaced persons to set up their own cooperatives. This is something we see in Spain and Turkey, and displaced persons forming their own cooperatives to provide services for themselves or host communities, childcare co-ops of Yemeni refugees, for instance, in Morocco is an example. And displaced persons and host communities organizing into cooperatives together with support from international organizations. And we've seen this in Turkey, for instance, in Gaziantep on the border with Syria, with the local women and the Syrian women refugees coming together. And finally, returning displaced persons, rebuilding their own communities through cooperatives. We've seen this in northern Sri Lanka, where the displaced, internally displaced, as they were going back home, starting to work the land through cooperatives and agricultural cooperatives, and then also marketing through these cooperatives. On the COVID response side, as I was mentioning at the start, crisis times are also times when private and public sector actors rediscover the value of cooperation, community-based action, solidaristic action in delivering goods, services. And this time around, the pandemic is no different. Especially on the social front, cooperatives have really stepped up to the plate, providing relief for their workers, members, communities, shifting production to PPEs, health co-op starting telemedicine services, advocating for their members, communities, for with government for services. There are some lessons to be learned, I think, from this, and in terms of preparedness for future bouts of these crises. And it's important that the government measures launched in response to these crises take into account cooperatives as players in providing relief, so that they are sitting in the relief platforms. And including them in community response strategies as social development actors is great, but then also recognize them in the economic, like financial relief packages, because they are economic actors, they're enterprises and they're community-based enterprises, so they play both functions, and they've done well on the social front, but a lot of co-ops have also suffered on the economic front, like many other establishments with the closures and lockdowns. And the tendency is often for local and national government actors to reach out to co-ops as part of immediate crisis response and then kind of forget about them afterwards. But I think, for local preparedness, food security type issues, it's really important that they are not just seen as short-term actors of crisis response, but also considered in the long haul strategy. Where are some areas of inspiration coming? I would say one is restructuring of struggling enterprises into worker cooperatives, especially in the case of bankruptcies. This is one way to preserve jobs, and in coming out of other crises, it has emerged in a number of countries, like in Argentina with Empresas Recuperadas after the 2001 crisis, in Greece after the 2007 crisis. In follow-up to the strikes, worker walkouts in a number of platform economy businesses, I think co-op alternatives also could have potential if also supported by, of course, some of these education, financing, and regulation kind of enablers. But also, I think it's important that existing co-op organizations also step up to help these emerging sectors and workers in these emerging sectors with the transition of their knowledge on management and governance. The potential of health co-ops has come to the forefront in handling the pandemic. Co-op provision of health services can play an essential role in vulnerable communities. They've, again, mobilized really fast in countries like Brazil, Argentina, Spain, Portugal, where health co-ops are quite prominent. We are working with the International Health Cooperative Organization and a few other partners in setting up a global platform and pilot testing public health service provision, about health service provision through existing agricultural and financial cooperatives in Cameroon and Kenya as starting points. And also with mandatory lockdowns around the world, informal economy workers have really been, have suffered. They are among the first to lose their livelihoods, facing cruel choice between hunger or infection. Traditionally, informal economy workers, waste pickers, street vendors, home-based workers use cooperative and solidarity association models. So during the pandemic, these organizations have advocated for their members and facilitated access to income and assistance For instance, HomeNet South Asia, an organization of home-based workers in South Asia, notes that 90,000 of their 900,000 members who still have some work and income during this crisis belong to cooperatives and producer associations. So I think there's something to be said about how, when we are looking at economic recovery funds, all informal workers that cover all informal workers, but also support these workers, organizations, enterprises, cooperatives. And maybe one more, and I'll stop. um, Producer and consumer cooperatives are among key players in supplying, in keeping supply of chains of essential foods and goods moving, while also relocalizing production, especially when produce coming from elsewhere is blocked, as you saw with the restrictions on movement of people and goods during the pandemic. And there are some examples of shorter, fairer, efficienter, more efficient supply chains among cooperatives and other SSE institutions. We see this in fair trade, but also in the specific form of co-op to co-op trade, where producer co-op and consumer co-op are linked. It could happen within a country, like the UK, but it could also happen, across regions and globally. So yeah, what's a final word? We are talking about we can a new way of doing things, a better way of doing things, needing new forms of business, new models of growth, a variety, diversity of enterprises, and how we need innovative solutions. And I think maybe co-ops are an old tool, but then they again keep reinventing themselves, and young people and communities keep rediscovering them in addressing emerging problems or persisting problems. So maybe if we pay attention to them, they may actually be useful tools toward shaping a future work that we want. So back to you, Edu,
Uh,
for our discussion.
Simak, thank you so very much for this. That whirlwind tour around the world.
Sorry, it was too long, huh?
No, no, not at all. To me, I don't know if others will join me in thinking this. It's already hearing you. Just this talk is a major corrective to my understanding of the cooperative as an organizational form. I mean, the parameters of change that impact the world of work that you discuss, and the environment, sort of technology, demographics, in business schools especially, these are of course always sort of talked about, but from the perspective of the private profit seeking firm, sometimes the public sector. And where the cooperatives come into the picture, they're sort of these quirky, aspirational, desirable, but sort of peripheral actors. So in my mind, just hearing you give us this picture of a world where cooperatives are real, they exist, they respond to a whole sorts of challenges, and they're doing it right now. I mean, that's inspiring. And also for the students among us who are looking for an interesting master's or sort of a PhD project, I think there's a lot that can
always open to sharing resources, connections on that. And I'm glad your business school is teaching, because guess what? I kept going to school and nobody ever talked about cooperatives or, solidarity. I remember in elementary school, first grade, we had a cooperative club. It may have disappeared by your time, but and it ran the canteen for simit, and gazoz, but it also would do these like produce local and consume local kind of weeks, where we would bring from home dried figs and raisins and stuff. That's what I remember, but never else did I see it anywhere in my.
But the examples you give us, and the way you link that to the larger structural sort of forces, really prompt us to think that we need to look at cooperatives not just as a sort of because we like the idea of them, but that they're quite real. Now, I'd like to take some questions. We will go on till the top of the hour, and we're quite strict with timekeeping. But I hope everybody has Sima's contact information in the chat that Yvonne's kindly put up for us. I'm trying to follow a tradition within our school of giving the floor first to any students who might want to pose questions. Please just raise your hand and or write something in the chat box so I know that you would like to speak.